So, hello and welcome along to another edition of Isolation Interviews for Hospital Radio Reading and for my YouTube channel. And my guest today, well, I'm super excited to be joined by the Reverend Richard Coles. Thank you for giving up your time.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's very nice to talk to you, Matthew.
Now, obviously, the last couple of years have been tough for many. How have you found the last couple of years? How have you coped with this sort of new way of living?
It's been doubly tough for me because just before lockdown happened, my husband died. So I had a sort of personal lockdown that all of a sudden went into a big general lockdown. So that's been very tough. And I have walked through the valley of the shadow of death, I suppose, to coin a phrase. And as have so many people. The good stuff you discover is there's great resilience in family and friends and community, great resilience in the National Health Service too, thank God and everyone for that. But also, it's a cliche, but it's true, with challenges come opportunities, and as I hope we finally begin to emerge, provided it's safe to do so, we maybe have, I hope, reminded ourselves of what's really important, and that's our solidarity, and that what we can do together when we come together as a community, and that we understand the important things of life again, and maybe spend less time getting hysterical on Twitter over nonsense, and more time recommitting ourselves to taking care of one another.
That's the thing is, I think particularly in the height of lockdown, people were so caring of other people. People were going and checking on their neighbours, were making sure that people in their local community were able to get food or were being looked after. Would you say that for a time it brought people even closer together?
I would, and that was really important because there was so much that was driving people apart. It was a real challenge for us in church, actually, because we're so used to being at the centre of the community, the draw to which people come, and we had to close our church, and we weren't able to do that. But what was good about that was that we reinvested those energies in the community. So we started a community support team, not just church, I'd say lots of people, but we worked very hard to ensure that everyone had a named person and a number that they could call, who would make sure that they had everything they needed, prescriptions, shopping, that kind of thing. And also just that stuff, Matthew, that comes up when statutory agencies can't provide essential services for people who are very vulnerable. And we have people in our community, of course, are like that. And we were just able to make sure that nobody fell through the bottom of that net. I hope they didn't.
The other thing as well that you touched upon earlier was, of course, the fantastic work the NHS have been doing and all key workers out there. What would you say to the amazing people out there that have kept this country running?
Well, I would say thank you, first of all. And I would also say that I think there has never been a stronger case to be made for the NHS to be rewarded properly. And I don't just mean by a round of applause on a Thursday night, although that's a very welcome thing. But I just think, we've all discovered in this just what an enormously valuable resource we have in the NHS and how we need to treasure it. And one of the ways we might do that persuasively is by ensuring that the people who work there are adequately rewarded for what they do. So that's really important, but I'm not here to beat that drum particularly. I think it's just, why do we love the NHS? Because it reminds us of those essential values at the heart of our lives, that we care for one another, we look after each other, we look out for each other, and we do that with extraordinary sacrifice and dedication and professionalism.
Now, obviously, wanted to go back for you. Your career started with music. So, where did the love of music come from for you? How did you get involved in music?
Well, it was very early for me, Matthew, because, well, partly it was because I had a grandfather who played the piano and was a big character. When I was a little boy, I can remember him playing the piano and singing, and everyone standing around and being enthralled by it. I realise now that what he was singing was smutty songs, which I didn't understand at the time. But I remember thinking, oh, God, I'd quite like some of that. And then I took to music very early. I was lucky to do that. And then I was a chorister when I was a kid, so I had a lovely treble voice when I was a boy, and that got me into a choir. And that meant that I was making music to a professional standard, literally when I was in short trousers. And, the stuff that captivates you when you're a kid is often the stuff that stays with you through life. And so the two things came together for me, music and also church, although I was away from the church for much of my most vivid musical career.
And obviously, when the Communards how did you guys get together? How did that come about?
Homosexuality. So basically, I realised I was gay in Kettering in 1978. And, I'd realised before that actually, but what I'd realised by 1978 was that if I was going to lead a livable life, it wasn't going to be there. It was a much tougher more judgmental, less inclusive world then, and if you were gay, you had some real challenges. And I realised that those were only going to work if I sort of escaped. So I went to London when I was 18, and there I met another gay runaway, Jimmy Somerville from Glasgow, completely different from me, couldn't be more different really. But we found a common purpose, and we threw in our lot together. And I was just very, very fortunate that Jimmy turned out to be one of the most talented singers of his generation. And I sort of hitched my wagon to him. And before I knew it, I was the unlikeliest pop star of the 1980s.
I mean, that must have been a strange thing to suddenly have to get used to fame and to people knowing who you are. So, I mean, how did you get used to that?
Well, I mean, I was kind of the one who stood at the back playing the keyboard. So it was much more about being around Jimmy, who got, and deservedly, much more attention than I did because he was such a spectacularly gifted person, which caused me some resentment at the time because I wanted a little bit of glory too. Um, it was kind of, I don't know, it was kind of fun at first, and then you get used to it, and then the first experience you'll have when you realise that it's actually a pain and not always a benefit is perhaps when you're, I know, trying to have an argument with somebody, or you just want to go out and do your shopping, or people keep taking photographs of you while you're eating noodles. Never a good look. So that can be a bit burdensome. But I mean, the real benefit is that you begin to make an impact in people's lives, and you get rewarded for it hugely. We did in those days, and you could do stuff with that. You could use that to, I'd hope, create some sort of public benefit. And the thing that we did that I was most proud of, I suppose, was that we, I think, pushed back a little bit against the intolerance of the day, and that changed the lives of people and contributed to it.
I mean, as well, I imagine that when you get to perform on stage, that for you must have been such a thrill, such a buzz. I mean, what was it that you loved about, performing and being on stage?
Well, I'm quite nerdy, actually, Matthew. So for me, quite often it was the technical challenges that I most enjoyed. And because Jimmy was at the front, and Jimmy had that extraordinary natural gift of being able to engage with a huge crowd of people, I rather liked kind of doing the nerdy stuff, like the musical direction and making sure the rhythm section was where it needed to be, and making sure that the strings were together, and doing a little bit of direction from the keyboard. Although actually they were much better musicians than me, so I flattered myself. I think I just waved my arms around a bit. I don't really know if I was in control at all. But I liked that. All the boring stuff I liked. I liked the sound checks. I liked being in the studio. I liked production rehearsals, that kind of thing. The performance itself, I suppose it was because I was sitting behind keyboards, really. It wasn't me at the front doing all the hard work, which is, that was Jimmy's role.
I mean, was there songs that you performed that maybe got the best reaction from the crowd, or that you personally enjoyed the most? Were there ones that kind of stood out for you?
I mean, there were the obvious ones were, I mean, Don't Leave Me This Way, Never Can Say Goodbye, the dance floor fillers, and you could just, I mean, I don't mean to sort of flatter myself, but it was, I just played the piano really, but they still fill dance floors now, and it's very gratifying. Now I'm nearly 60 and a vicar to see a record that I made 40 years ago filling a dance floor. And also, I think, not suppose the 1980s were tough times for people, not just for gay people, but it was a very divided time politically, a bit like now, and there were lots of people, especially in the industrial or post-industrial cities of the north of England, and Scotland and Wales, who were really suffering. And so if you could go along and just give people a bit of hope, a bit of joy, that was a great thing.
And it must be amazing as well to know that your music has stood the test of time and is still getting played to this day. I mean, there are so many songs that get released and you never hear from again. So to have a sort of a standout, or even a couple of standout songs that have stood the test of time must be quite an honour.
I suppose it is, really. I mean, it's funny because it's a part of my life that was very kind of vivid in lots of other people's lives, because, pop music is the soundtrack of your youth, and for that reason it's really important. But actually, it was my job 40 years ago. And to tell the truth, I don't actually think about it. I don't actually think about it. I sometimes forget I was in a band. A lot of other people wish they'd forget I was in a band as well.
Now, obviously, religion came back into your life, and obviously, you became a priest back in, was it 2005 that will happen? So, I mean, what was it that brought you back to kind of religion?
Well, when I was a kid and as a chorister, I didn't believe any of it at all. I thought Christianity was, obviously a fairy tale, and nobody in their right mind would want to live like that. But I liked being in chapel. I loved the music. I liked the people. There was something about the distinctiveness of chapel churches, cathedrals, temples, mosques, synagogues, that is unique. This is why you still have, places, chapels, faith spaces in hospitals, I think, non-religious spaces where people can go to connect with the really deep stuff in life. That's really important, especially, as so often happens in hospital, people are facing really profound challenges. And I was at that time. HIV and AIDS had come along in the years of the 1980s. That had taken out about a third of my friends, I think, and that was devastating. And I wanted to connect with it. And once I did reconnect with it, I realised that actually it was where I needed to be. And then it just sort of came into focus.
And then I imagine, obviously, the great thing with what you do is you can get out there and you can speak to people and kind of share your words and everything with people. So, I mean, it must be great to have people who when they need assistance or need guidance, you can be there to kind of help them, really.
I hope so. I hope we don't mess it up too much. I mean, and one of the lovely things about, I love being a vicar, but one of the things I really love about being a vicar is that you don't really have to, vicarage is on the door and the dog collar announces what I do to everybody, all and sundry. And I think some of the things I like most of all are just the chance encounters, the conversations you fall into, the ring on the doorbell, and you can find yourself talking to somebody, and that can be just extraordinary sometimes. It happens all the time. And I love that. And also, you have a role within your own community, that I'm the person who's been around for the births and the marriages and the deaths, for the life of the school and the cricket club and the pantomime and the pub. And I'm just really woven into the life of this community, and I love that.
And I mean, I imagine that when, particularly over the last year with COVID and everything, and, people have been kind of stuck and not been able to do things, and with, funerals and all of these sort of, well, most celebrations not happening, and obviously funerals having to go online as such. I imagine it's good that you can kind of guide people through these kind of new processes that a lot of people don't know what's going on. So you can kind of be there to sort of help them as best you can, really.
Yeah, I think our job, particularly in funerals, and I know this having been bereaved myself, is that one thing that happens when you lose someone you love is that you go bananas, actually. And when you go bananas, you don't always make great decisions. And I think one of the jobs we have as clergy is just to be sure-footed about that, so we understand that this is chaos you're going through, but we'll make sure you get through it safely. I'm just about to do a funeral in a minute, actually. Somebody I was at school with. And that's important. But actually also, one of the things I learned in lockdown was actually learning from everybody else, that it would be ridiculous to imagine that somehow we are the only ones with expertise in how you weather these sorts of storms. And I think one of the great things, again, it's about being a vicar, is that I am constantly encouraged and surprised by people, the imaginative and creative and sacrificial ways they come up to deal with the challenges that we all face. Don't get in the way of it too much. The job of a vicar is not to mess up other people's naturally mobilised goodwill, I think.
I mean, the other thing as well is, obviously, over the course of the last couple of years, one thing that humans love is physical contact, touching and being together. And obviously that's been taken away from us for quite a while. Obviously, it started to come back, but there's still restrictions in place in areas and stuff. I imagine that must be hard to kind of get used to doing things, but not being able to necessarily give someone a hug if they're upset, or the usual things that humans do.
Yeah, I mean, you have to find other ways, don't you, of delivering what comfort and consolation you can. But a lot of my ministry is with older people and with those who have lost husbands and wives, perhaps of 40, 50 years, and who long for some kind of contact. And I would always be there to hold a hand and give a hug if asked to, if appropriate. The dogs are good, actually. So I would quite often take the dogs around to people, and the dogs would just, it was wonderful what comfort it would give to people just to let the dog sit on someone's knee and they could stroke the dog. And also for me, actually, I mean, I was starved of physical contact during lockdown, like so many people, but I did have the dogs, and that made a big difference.
Now, obviously, Christmas is around the corner. We're not far away. What have you got planned for Christmas? How will you be spending the festive period?
Well, it's an interesting one. Obviously, it's work, so it's a very busy time of year. And so it's busy until midday on Christmas Day, which is when the bars closed, if you see what I mean. And so then, and it's pretty exhausting, especially because we have midnight mass, which means I don't get to bed much before 1 or 2, and then I have to get up for the early service. So it's a you know it's busy. But then once the bar is closed, I get out of my dog collar and I get in the car and I drive to friends who live near here, and I always spend Christmas Day with them, and that's lovely. So it means I don't have to worry about turkeys and all that sort of thing. Somebody else could do that, and I just sort of parachute into their Christmas. So it's a family I know well, and they've been wonderfully. They took me in when David died, and like lots of people, Christmas is also overshadowed by bereavement because David died just before Christmas. Lots of people do, and there's a sort of tinge of sadness to it, naturally. And they sort of pick me up and help me along, and that's great.
I mean, that's obviously aside from the day job, what is your favourite part of Christmas? What is it that you look forward to most? I mean, is it the music? Is it the food? Is it the TV and films?
I mean, you'd think that a vicar would get bored of carols, and there are one or two which I will happily perhaps not sing again. But actually, I find as I get older, I find Christmas ever more poignant, and especially those carols which are about the people gathered at a crib, and there God has come, but not in power and glory, just a tiny little baby in this dark, dingy little stable in the back end of beyond. And there's something about that I find deeply poignant. And the other thing is bread sauce sandwiches, which is my invention. Simply take 2 slices of ordinary bread, butter them, spread with bread sauce, salt and pepper. It shouldn't work, but it really works.
Now, I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. But before we go, is there any messages you'd like to give to anyone who's stuck in hospital at the moment?
Be assured of my prayers and the prayers of the churches everywhere. You are not alone and you are not forgotten. And Christmas is not presents, Christmas is not telly, Christmas is not all those things. Essentially, it's about being reaffirmed in the knowledge that we are equally loved by God, who comes to us and lives with us. And that is undimmed, untouched by all the darkness and challenge and toughness of the world. And I hope you have a very, very holy and blessed Christmas.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's been an absolute pleasure. Of course, keep safe, and you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you, Matthew. Pleasure to talk to you.